The Rules Committee will come to order. Our first priority of the day is to recognize the gentlewoman from Grandfather Community, North Carolina.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say that I have some guests here today from North Carolina. Not from Grandfather Community, but close. The Dorsets and the Kents are here, and they're Sarah and Olivia are going to be going with me to see votes in a little bit, and they're very excited. Their grandparents and their parents are with them.
Nice? Make sure that you vote correctly, ladies. We appreciate that. Welcome. We're very, very happy to have you, and we're here now for consideration of H.J. Res. 37, disapproving the rules submitted by the Federal Communications Commission with respect to regulating the Internet and broadband industry practices. We're happy to have two very good friends from the West Coast, the ranking member from my state of California, and of course our good friend and my colleague with whom I've been sitting for the last hour, the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Walden. So please proceed, Mr. Walden. Congratulations. We're happy to have you. And if you have any prepared statement, it'll appear in the records in entirety without objection, and we'd welcome your summary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Internet, and I want to thank the members of the committee. The Internet is open and innovative thanks to the government's hands-off approach. As Democrat FCC Chairman William Kennard said, I think back in 1999, the fertile fields of innovation across the communications sector and around the country are blooming because from the get-go we have taken a deregulatory competitive approach to our communication structure, especially the Internet. The FCC nonetheless issued rules in December to regulate the Internet. Those rules, in the committee's opinion, the majority, will stifle innovation, investment, and jobs. There's no crisis warranting government intervention. The FCC even admits in its order that it conducted no market power analysis. So H.J. Res. 37 would disapprove the FCC's rules. It is introduced as a bipartisan resolution under the Congressional Review Act. The CRA is designed to allow an up or down vote on whether to nullify just these sorts of overreaching agency regulations by passing a joint resolution of disapproval. Passage requires only a simple majority in both chambers and is filibuster-proof in the Senate. It would prevent the agency from imposing the same or substantially similar rules unless Congress enacts a new law specifically authorizing the agency to do so. Opponents of H.J. Res. 37 object to the CRA process. But Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, one of the authors of the Congressional Review Act, has said the disapproval process is a, and I quote, reasonable, sensible approach to regulatory reform, close quote. The CRA was duly enacted by Congress and signed into law by President Clinton. And despite their recent criticism, my colleagues themselves have co-sponsored disapproval resolutions in the past, including Mr. Waxman, my friend and ranking member on the subcommittee, Ms. Eshoo, Mr. Markey, Ms. Schakowsky, Mr. Dingell, all co-sponsored H.J. Res. 72 in 2003. Mr. Waxman, Ms. Eshoo, Mr. Doyle, and Ms. Schakowsky, and Ms. Baldwin co-sponsored H.J. Res. 79 in 2008. Both were resolutions disapproving FCC rules. My colleagues say we should be spending our time on other issues. I remind them that we are only here because without clear statutory authority, the Federal Communications Commission has wasted more than a year on network neutrality. Moreover, we were prepared to address Spectrum last month, but had to delay when my Democratic colleagues asked me to postpone a markup and hold an extra network neutrality hearing, in addition to the one we held with all 5 FCC commissioners. As a result, we had 2 hearings on net neutrality and the CRA. It was probably the first time I can remember where the minority actually ended up with more witnesses than the majority. And once we nullify these job-killing regulations, we'll be able to move on and focus on the things that are far more important to the economy. Dr. David J. Farber, grandfather of the Internet, says the FCC's, quote, order will sweep broadband ISPs and potentially the entire Internet into the big tent of regulation. Now, what does that mean? Customer needs take second place, and a previously innovative and vibrant industry becomes a creature of government rule-making, close quote. The order picks winners and losers, and it will threaten small providers that don't have the resources to send teams of lawyers to camp out at the FCC. How carriers manage their networks should be determined by engineers, entrepreneurs, and customers in the marketplace, not by as few as 3 FCC commissioners. While some large providers acquiesced so the Internet wouldn't be regulated like an old-fashioned telephone service under Title II of the Communications Act, even they are still concerned and say network neutrality is a solution in search of a problem. AT&T's CEO has said, and I quote, "Regulation creates uncertainty. I would be lying if I said I was totally pleased with it, and I'd like to have had no regulation, to be candid, but that was not going to happen." The CEO of a large cable association has said, quote, "There could certainly be an adverse economic impact by chilling the willingness to deploy these new services," close quote. The CEO of a large wireless association said that some uncertainty over FCC implementation remains, that none of its members have indicated they believe the order will promote the economy or jobs, and that, and I quote, "increased regulation tends to depress rather than accelerate investment," close quote. Now, if not challenged by us, Federal Communications Commission may well continue to grab power to regulate any interstate communications service, whether or not they have clear authority from the United States Congress. Section 230 of the Communications Act makes clear that it is the policy of the United States, quote, "to preserve the vibrant and competitive free market that presently exists for the Internet and other interactive computer services unfettered by federal or state regulation." This is nothing more than a weak attempt to do an end run around the D.C. Circuit's April 2010 case, where they ruled in Comcast's case that the FCC failed to show it had the authority to regulate Internet network management. And I would point out that this is likely to find itself back in court again. A vote against this resolution bringing this measure to the floor, as prescribed by statute, is nothing more than a vote to allow the FCC to adopt substantially similar rules under Title II when the FCC loses in court, something even network neutrality advocates say is likely. Indeed, the FCC still has a proceeding open to do just that. Because the language of the Congressional Review Act specifies the specific language of disapproval resolutions, amendments are generally not in order. For that reason, I would seek a closed rule. To allow amendments would frustrate Congress's intent in providing a straight up or down vote on whether to disapprove agency rules. With that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your time and look forward to
Thank you very much, Chairman Walden. We appreciate your being here, and thanks for your very thoughtful testimony. Ms. Eshoo.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see you, and all of the members of the committee. Thank you for having me here to testify on this issue. Right off the top, I'm not here to oppose the CRA. My testimony is regarding the use of it as a vehicle to overturn the FCC's open Internet rules. And over the past 2 months, as Chairman Walden said, the Energy and Commerce Committee, our subcommittee, have had testimony about this issue, and I will talk about that. The conclusion of those that testified, the stakeholders, was that overwhelmingly they oppose the use of the CRA and believe that the Internet should remain open and free. From an American entrepreneur, Robin Chase, who testified that her ability to launch Zipcar would not have been possible were it not for an open Internet, to the comments of Free Press, a public interest group which was invited by my Republican colleagues to testify during the subcommittee's legislative hearing. They opposed using the CRA in this instance. With widespread agreement, and I think all members of this committee need to pay special heed to this, there was widespread agreement from those that filed comments at the FCC and more than 130 organizations who sent letters to the Congress opposing this resolution. I really think that my conclusion is that this isn't really about acting in the best interests of the American people, but I think really a pursuit against a government agency and their ability to provide basic consumer protections. Despite repeated assertions by my Republican colleagues, the FCC's open Internet rules are not about regulating the Internet. The FCC's order is intended to preserve basic rules of the road for the Internet, ensuring the openness which over the past 15 years has resulted in more than 3 million new jobs in our country. 3 million new jobs in our country. It has facilitated the start of new American businesses like eBay, Google, and Netflix, as well as millions of other internet-based businesses now, and it will continue to in the future. The order also creates a line of sight for broadband providers to continue with their investment and innovation while removing the regulatory uncertainty, and we had testimony on this issue of uncertainty associated with the ongoing debate on open internet rules. That's why the FCC's order is supported by not only scores of small businesses across the country, but also the nation's biggest broadband providers, among them AT&T, Comcast, and Time Warner Cable. You can't find a more inclusive coalition and broad and deep than those that are opposed to using the CRA in this instance. Now, by preventing blocking and unreasonable discrimination, the Internet can remain a source of innovation and new ideas. That really is at the core of why the Internet has been so wildly successful. And not a platform where consumers and businesses are told which source of news, information, and entertainment they can access. Consumers want to have choice. They want to be in the driver's seat. They don't want corporations holding back on speed or what they are going to receive. They want it to be open and accessible, and that's why we have enjoyed the success that we have. Furthermore, transparency is absolutely essential. This ensures that consumers and businesses can make informed decisions because they'll know how traffic is being managed by their broadband service provider. The no blocking rule and transparency requirements, believe it or not, are not controversial. Yet when amendments were brought forward during the committee process by Representatives Doyle and Matsui, they were to preserve these widely supported elements of the FCC's rules. They were ruled out of order, and members were not given an opportunity to vote on their, what I think were substantive merits. While there may be situations in which the CRA is an appropriate vehicle, and as Chairman Walden said, I, along with many others, have found the CRA to be appropriate in terms of its application and use, and I have voted for that in the past. I don't believe that this is, and nor do many of the members on my side of the aisle, believe that this is an appropriate vehicle to be applied in this case. By not considering these issues under a regular HR bill that includes debate and votes on amendments, I think that we've run counter to our tradition of transparency and prevented members from developing communications policy within the scope of the committee's jurisdiction. And I say this because under the CRA, it's not allowed. It simply is not allowed. I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again. The CRA is a blunt instrument, and in this situation, as I said at the committee, maybe it should stand for can't resolve anything. As a Congress, I think we should be focused on promoting job creation and building a foundation for more growth of small internet-based businesses and American jobs. And I want to say that again, building a foundation for growth of small internet-based companies and American jobs. It's what's happened in the past. All of the testimony that we heard from the companies, from organizations, from faith-based organizations is really incredible to hear from faith-based organizations, small businesses across the country, as well as the very large broadband service providers in agreement. I don't think that we should be creating market uncertainty and hindering for future innovation. So for all of these reasons, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I oppose the CRA and the use of it in this this application, and obviously will urge my colleagues in the House to do the same when it comes to the floor.
Thank you very much, Ms.
Thank
Eshoo.
you.
Appreciate your being here. Thanks
Sure.
again to Chairman Walden. I have no questions. Mr. Sessions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Sarah and Olivia, welcome. we're delighted that the two gentlewomen from North Carolina have chosen to be with your favorite congressman today, and I hope you have a great time on the floor. Chairman Walden, Anna, thank you very much for being here today. I think you both very clearly laid out a reason why what the FCC has done is not only unwise, but will harm entrepreneurship, innovation, and really just the bottom line is jobs in this country. Perhaps, Anna, you don't like the methodology by which we've gone about it. The same effect would be we disagree with the FCC and what they're doing. I'm very concerned about jobs in this country. I think the Congress is concerned about, and they see the hindrance of not only job, but entrepreneurial spirit that is taking place very rapidly that we're losing. Chairman Walden, I want to thank you for being here. As you're well aware, Mr. Chairman, I spent 16 years in the telecommunications industry before coming to Congress. I'm aware of not only how to build jobs in this country, but really how we get better, bigger broadband access available to so many people, not just in rural areas of which you're aware of by virtue of you being Congressman from Hood River, Oregon, but also all across this country, the opportunity for disabled people, the opportunity for people who may not have access otherwise. And I think that if we want to shut down and close off and inhibit what we have as freedom and opportunity, we could just keep doing what this administration, the FCC, chooses to do. So I'm delighted that both of you are here today. I'm pleased to hear the gentleman, Ms. Eshoo, agree fundamentally with the soundness of your argument, and I can't wait to vote for this on before I yield back.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you both being here. I, too, wish that we were talking about how to protect and create jobs rather than this. I mean, I guess my problem with what we're doing here is that, you know, even if this resolution of disapproval passes the House, it has to go to the Senate, then we have to have the President to sign it. I mean, this issue right now is squarely before the courts. It just doesn't seem like an appropriate time to do all this. But putting all that aside, we could debate all that on the floor.
Would the gentleman yield just on that
Sure, yeah.
minor point? Because today, actually, the court set aside the Verizon case without prejudice, so it's not now before the court. It just happened today, just for the record. They can refile.
My understanding was only a procedural issue, and they're going to refile.
Yes,
But we could debate on the floor. Let me just say something about the process. Here we are again, another closed rule. I mean, last week we dealt with the deem and pass resolution under a closed rule, and under this process, am I correct that not a single Democratic amendment was allowed a vote during the two markups, having all been ruled non-germane in by the subcommittee and the full committee chair?
That's correct.
And the two amendments that have been submitted to the Rules Committee, the Doyle Amendment and the Matsui Amendment, my understanding, if this was brought up under a different process, would be considered germane.
They would?
And I guess...
May I respond to that,
Yeah,
Mr.
sure.
Chairman? Yeah, we were just following the advice and counsel of the House parliamentarian that under the continuing resolution, or the Congressional Review Act, that these amendments would not be in
But if it
order.
had been brought up under a different process...
But then it wouldn't be under the Congressional
Right,
Review
no,
Act.
but I guess what's happening is this pattern
So we were
developing here
following
where people,
the law.
you know, are trying to follow the rules, and the rules are always rigged against them. I mean, here you have two members that have brought up amendments that, under a different process, under an HR process, would be considered germane, and under this process, they're not. I mean, under Cutco, for example, you know, if you want to offset something by cutting a tax loophole for some oil company or some special interest, that's non-germane. I mean, you know, we're all the rules seem to be kind of rigged against us, and I just you know, this is just a comment on process, and that is that you know, we've all the talk about open rules, and we had deem and pass under a closed rule, and we're going to vote another closed rule here. I don't know. At some point, I think people need to live up to you know, their promise of a more open Congress. My problem here is, I mean, I have some substantive problems on the issues, but just it's kind of the process. Here we are again. We have two amendments by people I think who are both on the committee.
Mm-hmm. They are.
You know, under an HR process would be considered germane, but because you chose to go about it in this process, you know, they're not germane, and yet another closed rule. So, you know, I think on our side, we'll try to make those democratic amendments in order. We won't succeed, and we'll try to see if we can open up the process. But anyway, I regret the process. Thank you.
Let me just say that we've had a century and a half of the germaneness rule, and I've been talking to staff, and in this Congress we have had more amendments voted on the House floor within the first 90 days than we have in the entire last
Will the
Congress.
gentleman yield?
We believe. Of course, I'm happy to yield.
Yeah, and the other point I was making is that the process seems to be rigged against us. Again, under the HR 1 model that I think you're referring to, you know, there was no we were unable, the way the bill was put together, to get after some of the most egregious, I think, spending abuses, because tax subsidies for...
And it was very impressive to see Democratic amendments pass the House floor during debate on H.R. 1.
Subsidies for big agriculture were protected. But anyway...
I now recognize Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank both the members for coming, and I want to tell Mr. Walden I certainly agree with you. I don't think we need the FCC attempting to regulate the Internet. It's been one of the best things that's happened in this world, and by allowing the government to get involved, it almost always messes up whatever it gets involved with. And so I'm fully in support of what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Hastings. To respond to Mrs. Fox?
Let me ask Ms. Eshoo a question. Ms. Eshoo, what do you want to say?
Thank you very much, Mr. Hastings. I think that there are a couple of things that, while it certainly sounds as if members have made up their minds, I don't believe that this is a partisan issue. Our constituents, without exception, engage in the Internet for just about everything now. I mean, this has really revolutionized our lives, how we work, how we learn, and I could go on and on. You know what that is. Now, this charge that the FCC is going to ruin the Internet, in plain English, I think is hogwash. First of all, if there were testimony that was the opposite of what was given to the committee, of company after company, corporation after corporation, small, medium, and large, thousands of small businesses represented by their respective trade organizations, all were in opposition, not to what the FCC did, but to the use of the CRA. So while your argument, the chairman's argument is that this is going to ruin the Internet, the very businesses that are in the Internet business testified to the exact opposite. So I think that that's very important to place on the record. Secondly, why did the FCC engage in these in the rules? And I think it's a very light touch myself. It was in reaction to specific abuses designed to prevent future problems, because there were many cases. In 2005, the Madison River Communications allegedly blocked VoIP on its DSL network. It was settled by FCC consent decree that included a $15,000 payment. In 2006, Singular blocked PayPal after contracting with another online payment service. In 2007, Comcast initially denied, then they admitted, after an FCC complaint was filed, that it blocked peer-to-peer traffic. Comcast subsequently changed its practices, and the FCC directed Comcast to disclose its network management practices and enjoined it from blocking voice over IP. In 2008, the Max Planck Institute released a study finding significant blocking of BitTorrent in the United States, including efforts by Comcast and Cox. Now, there's even more, but the point is that there have been violations. This has happened. And so the light touch of the FCC, agreed to, again, by all of these Internet companies, many of whom I have the privilege of representing do not support the use of this instrument. So I wanted to offer that. I think you probably have your minds made up, but I think it's very important to state that for the record, and I appreciate Mr. Hastings giving me the time to add that to the record.
Thank you. I also wish to welcome both of you here, not
Thank
knowing
you.
necessarily the significance of the details. I do know that anyone smart enough to bring Ray Baum here has to have my support. So because of him, Greg, you've got something going. I would, though, ask, since you're the one that is purporting the hogwash, do you have a response to that concept?
Oh, yes, and I appreciate it. Mr. Bishop, thank you for giving me the opportunity. First of all, let's put on the record that this is a bipartisan approach. And in fact, the CRA resolution is co-sponsored by 2 Democrats in the House, Mr. Peterson and Mr. Boren, and 10 Democrats voted with us on the House floor to cut off funding to the Federal Communications Commission to enact this order. Second, Mr. Chairman, and before I go on, speaking of openness and transparency, I want to commend you and your leadership as chairman of this committee in getting cameras installed and microphones installed so the whole country can watch, as well as our colleagues in the Rules Committee for the first time in the history of this committee, and I appreciate your commitment to openness and transparency. Yes, I was going to ask you to sit up straight. I would also point out that it's not exactly accurate to portray that every company in America supports the FCC's action, including every communications company in America. By the way, Verizon did file in court against these rules. Second, it is not a reach to suggest that some of the companies were coerced into supporting the FCC's rules. Those are my words, not theirs, because maybe some of these big companies have other big mergers and things going on that the FCC would have to later approve. And so that might affect them signing off on something less than Title II regulation, which would treat the Internet as a common carrier, which would subject it to all kinds of rate regulation. And by the way, the Federal Communication has kept open as a club hanging over the head of these companies a Title II proceeding. They have refused to close their Title II proceeding. So if you're one of these companies and you're threatened with Title II regulation, which is the heavy dose, and an open proceeding remains at the Commission during this period of time, are you maybe going to give in and accept Title I light touch, quote-unquote, regulation? Yeah, you probably are, especially if you've got a big merger deal coming up with another company. And so it is a bad way to operate. And let me just say this, that in the Comcast BitTorrent decision, it was taken to court, and the circuit court here in D.C. said, FCC, you have not demonstrated to us that you have the authority to regulate information services known as the Internet, and slapped them down. This is nothing but an end around the BitTorrent case by the FCC, exceeding their authority to try to regulate the Internet. Now, all the vibrancy, all of these businesses, everything we've heard about that I share with my colleague about the great innovations that have come in the Internet, by the way, have come without any regulation of the Internet. It's an information service. It has not been regulated. And all of this has transpired. And by the way, I happen to believe customers, Internet users, the whole Internet community is pretty vibrant and effective at responding when there is manipulation of the Internet, there is blockage, and there are these problems. That's how these have been resolved in most cases going forward. Now, if there were market power abuse, then the Federal Communications Commission should have done what other commissions of this federal government do. They do a market power analysis. And I think you, all of us on this committee would say that that's the appropriate procedure. In this case, however, the FCC chose not to do a market power analysis. I would direct you to the footnote 87, where they simply state, because broadband providers have the ability to act as gatekeepers even in the absence of market power with respect to end users, we need not conduct a market power analysis. So they didn't even do the job. They didn't even determine there was market power, let alone abuse of market power. Now, let me tell you how far they think they can go without us, the Congress, whether you're for net neutrality rules or not. This should be of interest, as you have a court that struck down their authority. You have many of us who believe they don't have the authority to begin with, but they spent a year getting us to this point. In their rulemaking, they say on page 31, sub 52, finally, We decline to apply our rules directly to coffee shops, bookstores, airlines, and other entities when they acquire internet service from a broadband provider to enable their patrons to access the internet from their establishment. I want you to think about how Orwellian that statement is. We decline to apply our rules directly to coffee shops, bookstores, airlines, and other entities. That means they presume they have the authority within their rules to apply these rules to how coffee shops and bookstores would manage their internet connections. Now, as to the capital investment, we did have testimony from an independent economist who is a certified financial planner, and she works in these areas. She had no clients at this time. She advises on investment opportunities, especially in the area of communications. And she told the committee to raise capital for investment and innovation, both application providers and carriers must be able to raise revenues, control their costs, have the flexibility to respond nimbly to changing market conditions. She said the order leaves application providers free to make their own decision and attempts to nurture them by shifting some of their transport costs onto broadband internet access providers. She goes on to talk about that to raise capital is going to be difficult under these rules. Networks have a voracious and unending appetite for capital. They must constantly be upgraded to satisfy the need for ever-increasing speed, quality, and security. So her whole point here is that you're going to have a problem if you're the provider of the internet capacity if these rules go into effect, and capital is going to shift away from that part of the market, and that's going to be a problem. So there are a number of issues here that were fleshed out in the committee. And finally, once again, under the CRA is not a blunt instrument. It is a very, very narrow instrument that only looks at one set of rules, and that is why we chose it.
May I respond, Mr. Chairman? Thank you. I'd like to point a couple of things out. I don't believe I said that every single company in the entire nation had weighed in on this and opposed the use of the CRA. But the ones that did were overwhelming. Now, these are the companies that are in the business. If they thought this was going to chill the market for them, if it was going to smother innovation, if it was going to decrease the creation of American jobs or chip away at American innovation, I've worked with these companies for a long time. They are as independent as they come. They're not Republicans, they're not Democrats. If anything, they have a very, very strong libertarian strain to them. So they weigh in given their own interests. And when they did, they said they did not support this. And so I want to make that very clear. It was overwhelming. If you look at the commentary that came to the FCC from people across the country, businesses, individuals, it's one of the largest responses that the FCC has ever had, and it was overwhelming. Over 90% that contacted the FCC weighed in with their comments, people from across the country saying that they were in support of the rules that the FCC had written. And they weighed in for an open, accessible, free internet. Now, the issue of Comcast that the chairman just raised a few moments ago, that case, and most frankly, when Comcast went to court, that was under the Martin chairmanship of the FCC. You know why they had a case? They had a case because the FCC moved against them, but the FCC had not drawn up any rules, and it was unfair. Regardless of the merits or the demerits, how you may see what was involved, that was why that case came out the way it did, and the origins of it. So the FCC has had complaints. They have had cases where internet service providers have blocked. It has happened. Your constituents and mine are not going to stand for that. And I think that the protection of consumers and also working with the businesses, which I've always done throughout my congressional career, is very important. Now, as far as the witness is concerned, the Republicans had 2 witnesses. One of their witnesses didn't agree with them. Free Press came in and testified against what was being taken up. And the woman that came seemed to be a lovely person, but as I read her CV, she majored in medieval history, which I think is an important major because my daughter has a graduate degree in medieval history, but had, I really don't think was the strongest witness at the committee. That's my view, and I offer it. And
Will the gentleman yield for
obviously
Mr.
is not
Bishop?
going to
Please yield for a moment.
Would you
Question?
yield, Mr. Bishop, would you yield to me? Because I can't let that last comment stand, if I might. I've got her degrees right here. Chartered Financial Analyst, MBA from Harvard Business School, MA, PhD, Harvard University, Comparative Literature, yes. But an MBA from the business school is not exactly just medieval history, I might say. Beyond that, let me just say on the Comcast BitTorrent case, my understanding is the court ruled on the substance and never got to the process.
Well, I don't
That's
know
what the
whether
council's advised me.
Mr. Chairman, whether the members of the committee want to get into BitTorrent and
Well, I
Comcast
only
and
say-
that. But my point, and I want to make it again, is I think that the majority wants to do this. I think the majority has a case against federal agencies, and I think that's what's being pressed here. The reason I said I thought it was hogwash, A, I don't think it's going to go anywhere after the House votes on it, and B, the businesses don't agree with you. You didn't bring in one business that said, we think this is terrific. They simply don't support
Actually,
it. They
we did have
didn't
a
support
witness.
it. Well, I don't know who they were. You didn't bring them in to testify, so.
We did too,
Mr. Chairman,
were they?
Chairman, if I can,
Yeah, it's your time, Mr. Bishop. I guess actually you did yield back, didn't you?
Yeah, I was wondering
Yeah,
if
you
I
did
could,
yield back.
if I could get my time to yield.
Yeah.
I'd appreciate it.
We're happy to give it to you. I know everyone wants to hear this.
I just lost it. I yield back.
Mr. Polis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I bring some background to this. My first company I started was an internet service provider, an ISP. Ran that for a number of years. Sold that subsequently, was involved in the content and application space with several companies on the internet. So I've certainly seen this issue from both sides. And this really speaks to the whole net neutrality debate, to what one believes the internet is. And I have always felt that all the innovation, job creation is on the application, software, content front. That's the dynamism. On the access front, there needs to be a measurable return on investment. There's no doubt about that. But at some level, it approaches a commodity. What drives the usage of that commodity is the applications and the content. There's no doubt about that as well. Over 1 million jobs have been created in application content, internet-related software. I couldn't find a metric for jobs created on access. I'm sure there were a few, but not anything close to that number. This is a somewhat bizarre bill, in my opinion, in that I think with the FCC rules and regs, it reached a good consensus with the industry about the right level of ensuring that everybody had open access to the internet. I mean, and what we're talking about with open access, just to take a step back, this is, what drives historically has driven the internet, whether it's companies like Yahoo, Google, all these successful companies. It starts with a garage entrepreneur, somebody who hooks up a computer, server in the garage, has some new content, has some new application. Boom, it's available on the internet. Now, if you replace that with something like what grocery stores have, slotting fees, you got to pay $1 million to play, just to have access to be part of, quote unquote, the internet. You're getting rid of all of the would-be entrepreneurs and would-be ideas to potentially have access to it. Now, I just have a couple of quotes from investment bankers, because I know that Chairman Walden mentioned that he thought that some of the companies that sort of endorsed the eventual rules did so under duress. And I try to look at the objective analysis of investment bankers. So Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, their analysts said the FCC agreement is consistent with our view that the net neutrality regulatory overhang has been eliminated from telecom and cable stocks. Pretty clear. And let me just translate that. There was an overhang. There was a fear that there would be an overarching government regulation. Once that didn't happen, and in fact there was very reasonable net neutrality regulations that pretty much everybody agreed with, the analyst, who's not self-interested in this case, he doesn't have any, or she doesn't have any merger before the FCC, they said there's no more overhang. We solved it. The Credit Suisse analyst said the regulatory environment has improved. AT&T no longer has to fear onerous net neutrality conditions. That's from the Credit Suisse analysis of AT&T. Just one more. The Raymond James analyst said, we're glad the staff makes this innocuous by simply placing official rules around what is already being done. And the good news is we do not believe this will have an undue impact on the carriers we cover. So I would just ask, Chairman Walden, given this, the very best analysis we have from this, the investment bankers who have an interest in providing objective analysis, if they feel that this was solved with the FCC's regulations, why are we even talking about, coming back and revisiting?
Very, very good question. So here's the answer in part. First of all, if you go back to the Comcast BitTorrent case, the court has already told the FCC that they don't have the authority in this area. Close to 300 members of Congress of both parties wrote the FCC and said, we really reserve this right, although some of those members preferred Title II deeper regulation, and so we're satisfied with what the FCC has done. But there is this authority question. Second, if there was clear authority from the Congress, then there wouldn't be litigation, and there will be. I don't happen to believe they have the authority, and neither does the majority of the committee. So
just quickly come for a quick question on that, because just before you get to the next part, I want to understand whether your objection then is policy or jurisdiction. Would you support, for instance, the FCC rules if they were a bill in Congress to enshrine what the FCC has proposed in statute? Would you support that?
I would want to have a hearing on that and follow due process so we understand the implications and bring in witnesses from all sides. That would be a legislative process. What they've conducted here, I believe, is not within the authority Congress has granted them. The court has already told them once in the Comcast BitTorrent case, you have not identified to us where you have this authority to regulate. I don't believe they have that authority to regulate. So whether you're for Title I, whether you're for Title II, regulation is not the issue here. The issue is they don't have the authority, and Congress needs to speak up. I understand the President and the Chairman are close friends. I got that. I understand this is a policy that he supports. I got that. I think we have an obligation and responsibility when we believe any federal agency has exceeded its statutory authority to take action, and that's what we're doing here.
I'm trying to get a sense of whether it's more of a jurisdictional issue than a policy issue. Do you have any problems with the underlying policy that we're talking about?
I think there are issues with the underlying policy.
You do, as well.
We'd be happy to flesh out in the committee process. That is not what's before us today. What's before us today is the FCC, despite many actions by Congress, or in the case of net neutrality, a lack of action, which agencies should read also as a signal at times, exceeded its authority, and on a 3-2 vote, straight party line vote, ran this out. Now, I just think we have an obligation to stand up and do something about that when that occurs. Now, as to the uncertainty, because that was the heart of your question, these economists may believe that, but if it was clear authority, that might be correct. It is not clear authority, and if it were clear authority, it wouldn't be litigated, and it will be litigated again, despite what happened today in the court. And we're taking this out.
Let me address some of what we're talking about here as well. One of the items that's included in HJ Res 37 is it would remove a no blocking rule that would effectively allow broadband providers the discretion to block lawful content. This is of concern, again, with regard to garage entrepreneurs, but also of great concern to the faith-based and free speech community. I have a letter here from the Conference of Bishops that I'd like to submit to the record, Mr. Chair. And in part, it mentions that this is from the letter from the Conference of Bishops. The Internet is open to any speaker, commercial or non-commercial, whether or not the speech is connected financially to the company providing Internet access, or whether it's popular or prophetic. And again, the concern here is you could have a broadband provider say, I don't like Catholics. I'm going to block Catholic content in my area. Now, couple that with the fact that in over 70% of households, they live in areas where there's only 1 or 2 wireline or broadband providers, and it seems that we have a recipe for a free speech disaster.
So that's where, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I seem you want me to respond.
And I want to get both of your opinions on that one.
Sure. That's where first, a federal agency, if it were doing its job, would have conducted a market power analysis. It did not do that. It stipulated on footnote 87 of its ruling that it believed there was market power, so therefore there would be market power abuse, so therefore there must be market power abuse. So they regulate. That's not how you do it. And they should have done a market power.
I mean, are you disputing the statistic from the FCC, and what I have in front of me shows that they reviewed the broadband retail market, and I don't know if they call that a market power review, it's probably called something else, but what they found is that 70% of households live in an area where 1 or 2 wirelines or fixed wireless firms provide
But that's
broadband.
like saying because somebody has a gun, we know they're going to shoot somebody else. That's not the analysis that needs to be done.
Ms.
It's a
Eshoo?
market power analysis. That's what those are called. They do it in the energy sector. They should do it in the telecommunications sector.
Well, I think that I think the following. The chairman says that the FCC should have done a market power study, et cetera, et cetera. I want to go back to the ingredients of what has made the Internet one of the most incredible American inventions since our country was born. I mean, this is one of the greatest sources of pride to all of us. It's an American invention, and it has revolutionized the world. And there are ingredients in that we all need to recognize. Maybe want to do away with the FCC so that there isn't anyone to implement anything. I don't know what that agenda is about. But I do know something about these companies. I understand what makes them go. I understand the venture capital side, the investment side. The big companies, I mean, Google is in my district. 11 years ago, or 12 years ago, Google wasn't even born yet. So, you know, there is the ingredients that has gone into this, and what we have seen is nothing short of extraordinary. So it seems to me that that recipe needs to be protected and continually used. There's a reason why faith-based organizations, not only the Catholic Conference of Bishops in the United States weighed in, but faith-based organizations across the board did. So there is a reason why they did. And there is a reason why there is a light touch, in my view, and many other people's views, about why the FCC did what it did. You can debate the various cases, but there have been abuses. And the consumers want to be able to make a choice. They don't want a company to block what they want to access. And so it seems to me that if you have large corporations, small businesses, consumers, faith-based organizations, advocacy organizations that have weighed in from across the country. I mean, it's an extraordinary coalition. And many of the members of the coalition that weighed in are really part of the Republican base. I mean, very much a part of the Republican base.
And to further, Mr. Eshoo, the folks on the other side, namely the cable companies, most of them have not weighed in favor of this bill. In fact, if I understand correctly, some have even opposed this bill.
Exactly.
Is that correct? Exactly.
And that's why I think it's important to, I mean, you can state your case, and I think the chairman obviously has his view on it. But what you need to substantiate it really doesn't exist. Now, the one small business that was an internet service provider that did testify said that it might be reasonable to block Netflix from some of his customers. And what he said was, quote, a reasonable network management practice. You know what that means?
Whatever you want.
Exactly.
Whatever you want.
So I don't think anyone that subscribes to Netflix would be too thrilled with that.
You could have you could have that ISP telling Netflix, unless you drop this movie and that movie, I'm not dropping Netflix, and then they get rid of their religious movies, or they get rid of their
and that goes to the
genre,
heart of the
it is.
argument and what the FCC chose to do. And so, thank you for asking, and I'm happy to comment.
Yeah, I think, no, I mean, the point is, right, you know, and I don't know, you can do more market analysis studies and this and the other, but it seems to me it's what is common sense, I think, to most Americans, because Americans love the internet, use the internet, what a tremendous innovation, is that there is one cohesive internet, and that it should not be, the person that sells you access should not be able to say, oh, it's the internet like in China, minus information about Tiananmen. And that's effectively what you would empower those gatekeepers to do, absent with this bill. I'd like to submit to the record, Mr. Chair, the administration's statement in opposition of H.J. 37. And I have one more question, since we just got the amendments, Ms. Eshoo, and actually both of you, I haven't had a chance to fully examine. I'd like to get your impression of what the two amendments that have been filed, if you could briefly tell us your position on those amendments.
I support them, and I think that, first of all, and I think that Mr. Walden would agree with me on this, Representatives Matsui and Doyle are very, very thoughtful members of the committee. They contribute, very important thinking. They know of what they speak, and they have offered sensible and I think needed amendments to this. So I do support them, and I know that the chairman would. I think the chairman would agree that they're strong working members of the subcommittee. So there's real substance to what they do.
Mr. Chairman, the two amendments.
Well, again, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Paulus, here's the deal. We're following the rules under which the Congressional Review Act was enacted into law in a bipartisan manner, and it's an up or down vote on an existing rule. So no, I would not support the amendments because that would not allow us to use the CRA as it's in.
And one final question here. So we've hit this with health care, and we hit this with a couple other things where it's kind of this whole issue of repeal and replace. And we're talking about repeal, and then you're saying maybe we'll go through the committee, replace it with something. Why would you not come to us with this once the committee has done its work, and if you are committed, for instance, to enshrining a no blocking rule and other aspects where there is broad agreement, why not have that whole package and just say, okay, we're going to have the replace piece, not just the repeal piece?
Mr. Chairman, if I may respond, Mr. Paulus, on health care, as I recall, when the House approved the health care law, did we get a chance in the Energy and Commerce Committee to have any amendments or markup? No, that's
Yes.
right. It just came to Rules Committee and
No,
then
that's not so.
to the House floor because it could not be
That's not so.
amended in the House in
That's
the
not
last
so.
Congress.
Though there were actually, I think, couple days of markups, if I'm not mistaken.
Not in the bill that came over from the Senate a year
Well,
ago.
this in this building that happens
when
all
we
the
were-
time.
when-
Some bills that start in both places. I mean,
This was the whole health care rewrite for the country that never had a hearing in the Energy and Commerce Committee and went straight to the. Oh, so you're.
HR 1 didn't have any hearings either. But again, my point is not about health care, and I was using an example.
I'm sorry,
I would say. Yeah, no, I was saying why
amendments.
Why do we not have the replace piece to say, okay, this is a repeal and replace, here's the alternative. You're looking at repeal in its entirety, getting rid of parts that have broad bipartisan consensus. Why not bring it all to us together and say, here's the alternatives?
Well, I'm advised by counsel the FCC already has rules in place, but the long and the short of it is everything we've heard about the vibrancy and the investment in the Internet has occurred absent a federal government agency getting involved. You see, I believe that the Internet works. It's the government that doesn't always work well. And so I'm not sure it's necessary. I'd be happy to hold hearings on it going forward. But I'd rather get on to the issues that really matter to creating jobs in America, like dealing with spectrum, which we're going to have a hearing April 12th on, like dealing with the FCC process reform, which I think is long overdue regardless of which party's in charge, dealing with interoperability for public safety networks. I mean, there are a lot of issues that we need to be working on, and I've been told that multiple times by my dear friend here from California. We shouldn't be wasting our time. This is more a housekeeping effort to deal with something that we believe where an agency has exceeded its statutory authority. And I don't care who's in the White House. I don't care. When an agency exceeds its authority, Congress should act. And this is a very specific, targeted means to do that.
Ms. Eshoo, do you think that this is, I guess, since Mr. Walden's been talking both about who has the prerogative piece and the policy piece, and we've discussed the policy piece, but on the prerogative piece, do you feel that the administration is acting consistent with statute in promulgating these rules?
I do. I think that there is a healthy debate about the different sections that were mentioned in terms of the Commission's authority. I think this goes more to the heart of really taking on the executive branch and the agencies. And I didn't hear any commitment to bringing back a package that would, at the top of the list, block blocking. So I don't think that's what the intent is here. And I have a great deal of regard for Greg Walden. I mean, he's knowledgeable and he's a decent, wonderful chairman and that, but I don't think there's a commitment here to block blocking. So my sensibilities tell me that this is about something else. And we can go on all day long or all evening long, and I don't think you want to do that, and I guess maybe we don't either. But there have been, if I might use the expression, sins committed against consumers. That's why the FCC took the steps that they did. And I keep hearkening back to, and everyone embraces the Internet and what it is and why it is the way it is. So I find this to be a light touch. Consumers do as well. Small businesses think so. Large corporations think so. And people across the country weighed in on this. And the same have weighed in and said, don't use the CRA on this thing. So from the investment community to faith-based organizations, it's one of the largest, broadest coming together of people I've ever experienced since I've been in the Congress, since 1993.
Yeah, which is why I'm just a little confused about, again, why we're here. I mean, when you have the independent investment analysis saying that they have eliminated any threat of regulatory overhang, they don't have to worry about government regulation of the Internet, they've addressed this issue, they've solved it, the cable providers themselves support it, the content providers support it. I don't see what the issue is, and there must be...
I think, if I might, I think that you'd have an awful lot of heads nodding if you use bumper sticker statements that we don't want the government to regulate or interfere with the Internet. Most people would not, just about everyone would nod in the affirmative. But ask consumers if they think their Internet service provider should be allowed to block or to charge more or to hold back on what they have access to today. Then you get into a policy. And sound policy, I think, does call for this light touch that the FCC has come up with. And as I said, the very, very broad and deep support for it. And that's why I think the the majority really doesn't have a case. I mean, they're speaking past the people that are in the business of doing that.
Past even their potential, the theoretical advocates in the cable companies. Right. So that's what I honestly can't figure out. Yeah. And I, based on this, oppose this concept, which seems to be threatening to the whole concept of what people believe the Internet to be and what the Internet is and what it aspires to be, in that there is one common Internet and people can provide access. If they have content, they can put it up there and others can pull it down. That's what the Internet is. And with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I enjoy speaking after my good friend, Mr. Polis, because I agreed with absolutely everything he had to say, but I'm afraid I might disagree about the conclusions. When you were speaking, Ms. Eshoo, you began with what a great American invention this is, and let's go back and let's look at all of the ingredients that have made this so spectacular and spawned on all of this innovation. And I guess I expected you to conclude with that it was some sort of federal government regulatory framework that was responsible for all of those successes. But it wasn't. You went on to talk about freedom and talk about the unregulated environment and how all of these opportunities were successful. How did you get from the wonderfulness that was the unregulated Internet to us being here today with you defending what seems to be
the largest federal It's an excellent question. And I want to pay tribute to you because you have really been paying very close attention. I could tell you were taking this all in a very serious way. I've landed where I am because of consumers, because of experiences that they have had. If, in fact, these experiences had never occurred, then there wouldn't be a need to draw up what I call a light touch by the FCC. And I don't know if you know what my district comprises. It's the home of Silicon Valley. So this is not a subject matter that let me put it this way. It's a subject matter of, that I deal with day in and day out. And I mean, the things that I've seen occur in the time that I've been in the Congress is nothing short of extraordinary and a great source of pride for our country. I think we all share in that. But again, I don't think your constituents or mine will put up with blocking or fast lanes and slow lanes. That's not what the Internet is. It has occurred. There has been a caseload at the FCC to demonstrate that. This is not fiction. It's fact. And I think that it's appropriate. And I don't think that it is the... see, I think we're going after this with a sledgehammer in terms of congressional response when the light touch of the regulation, supported again by the investment community, by the businesses, small, medium, and large, by consumer advocates, and all the others that we mentioned, that really says something.
I want to get to some of those businesses. You're right. My district, I'm just a suburban district, though one of the largest suburban districts in the country now. We have about 920,000 people. So while I don't have any of the Silicon Valley big business, I've got lots of consumers in my
Absolutely,
in my
we all do,
and
we want more of them.
I don't hear about that, but I'm a strong consumer advocate. If consumers don't want to be blocked, and I look in my area where we have a multitude of choices, why can't the consumer just make that choice? I know disclosure is important, but if we have that disclosure, is it only in areas where
it's a great question.
Market power exists?
It's one of the things that is at the heart of this, because if the consumer can't make the choice, but the company does, that's where you really run into a problem.
Tell me about that, because I remember the day. I remember the day at University of Georgia when the computer lab got its first Mosaic disk. Come on over, pick up your Mosaic disk, and you'll be able to see pictures out there on the internet. It was a big day, big day. But I'm a little concerned because I hadn't heard about any of this in the context of people deciding they don't like Catholics and blocking all Catholic media. What are some of these examples that are going on out there where folks have chosen issue areas where they say we just disagree with the First Amendment and we're gonna block all content that
in reading,
we don't like?
it's an important observation. In reading, and we can supply for the record of the Rules Committee the letters that we received at the subcommittee with particular emphasis on the faith-based organizations. And what they expressed in their letters, first of all, they're all nonprofits. And so the specter of faster, slow lanes or blocking is especially onerous to them because of how they use the internet. And they spoke to the free expression of that. And in our country, obviously, for the faith-based organizations, it's one of the hallmarks of our Constitution. So they feel quite threatened. They feel threatened by anything that would interrupt the freedom and the accessibility of the internet.
Well, I can identify with that. You use the word specter. You talk about feeling threatened. But
there are cases. There are cases at the FCC
of some of these. I don't like Republicans, or I don't like Democrats, or I don't like Catholics. Those kinds of issue-oriented blocking. I mean, that's just horrendous.
I didn't. No one said, including myself, said that they weighed in because they had been discriminated against. That's not. I think you're misunderstanding. They're weighing in. But we will supply those letters for you. They make for good reading.
Well, no,
and I did read all of them.
I have lots of fears of things that aren't going to become reality. I just thought that you were saying that this was a problem that was at play in America and that the FCC acted responsibly to solve it.
No, I said that even faith-based organizations, and Mr. Polis added to it the Catholic Conference of Bishops being one of them, not just the Catholics, but many a faith background in terms of their organizations weighed in on this. Now, you can. I don't think most people, when they get up in the morning, say, "I wonder what happened at the FCC today." But just last year, in 2010, AT&T blocked use of the Slingbox iPhone application on its 3G network. So there has been blocking. So again, there are examples, and so this is not something that
you're thinking of bandwidth blocking. I was thinking about issue area because I know on my telephone service. I've got, or my internet service is that 4G Clear network these days, and I get a big notice at the bottom of my statement that says unlimited access, unless you decide you're going to use too much.
And you want to keep it that way.
And then we're going to slow you down because
Well,
we're going to harm everybody else.
The chairman
if you
and I
use
and
yours
our colleagues are
irresponsibly.
going to deal with Spectrum so that broadband really does reach everyone. But I'm glad that you asked about faith-based organizations, and we'll provide that testimony to you via their letters, their communications.
Certainly, to my chair.
Well, I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I want to thank him for asking the question because I have to say, Ms. Eshoo, that I had exactly the same impression that Mr. Woodall had, and that was that you were asserting that different groups had been blocked. I think the record would show it, and at some point I'll go back through it, that was what you said. And I wanted to see if gentleman from Oregon.
I'm a very, if
Thank you,
I might, Madam Chairwoman, I'm a
but
very
you don't
devout
mind-
Catholic, and I don't throw faith-based organizations and what they say, I don't cast it around carelessly.
Well,
They never
I
said
wonder-
that, and I didn't say that. I
Ms.
said that
Fisher,
they weighed
thank you.
in. I said that they weighed in, and
I'd
they're
like
opposed.
to ask the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Walden, to respond.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Mr. Woodall. I would just say one thing. My understanding on the Slingbox issue is part of the reason they got in was to manage their network, because if everybody started downloading video over their phones, you might have crashed the whole network. So there are some technical engineering reasons why networks have to be managed, just as power grids have to be managed. And so I think that's important. Second, I think you touched on the real point that gets back to why you do a market power analysis and why you look at are there isolated incidents where things happen that shouldn't? Sure. That happens whether there's regulation or not. Is this a pattern? Is this an abuse of power? And that's what is the issue here. Look, it really gets back to the FCC still has open a Title II proceeding. What that means is they are taking testimony and considering whether to regulate the Internet as a common carrier, like the old phone lines. Now, they say, oh, I'm just listening to that. But that proceeding's open. And when we had Free Press testify, which Ms. Eshoo mentioned, they did testify that they're actually for net neutrality regulation under Title II, and they think the FCC will lose this case in court. So they want to go farther, and I think that's important. There are those out there who would like to go to Title II regulation, which I don't want. I don't want it. Its vibrancy has been its independence.
Right. Well, I certainly understand thinking about all those investment banks that Mr. Polis was reading from. I mean, for Pete's sakes, if I was invested in these companies, I'd be scared to death the federal government was going to step in and muck up, kill the goose that laid the golden egg too. But what happens with a CRA proceeding? If we pass this, Senate passes it, President signs it, does it foreclose dealing with this under Title II, or is that Title II procedure still going to be?
No, they could come on Title II. They could come back with different regulations in a different way. But look, we would, if I thought they had the authority, we wouldn't necessarily be bringing a CRA resolution.
That's important. Going back to what Mr. Polis said, I did agree with his entire pitch about what a wonderful thing that net neutrality reg might do in guaranteeing that the fears that Ms. Eshoo was talking about that organizations might have, that we could allay those fears. But if this body doesn't have the authority to make that happen, doesn't matter if it's a wonderful thing, doesn't matter if it would save the world tomorrow, if a regulatory body is acting outside of its jurisdiction, and we'll have to have that.
Will the gentleman yield for a moment on that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's why, again, I suggested this rather than looking at it again, as we have with other things, repeal and replace. And I also questioned the gentleman, Mr. Walden, about what his ideas were. Did he disagree with just who was doing it or what was being done? In the future, I think it would be very helpful to this body if we were presented with, okay, they stepped out and did something they shouldn't have. By the way, here's what we should do that actually replaces it. Let's enshrine it in statute.
I share your passion for getting some of those answers to the underlying substantive questions, but the absence of those answers is no excuse to allow a regulatory body to go outside the scope of the congressionally authorized program. And doesn't matter whether we agree or disagree. If we're outside of the lines, we owe it to folks to pull folks back into lines.
And if I might, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Woodall, also point out, these regulations only apply to the Internet pipe, if you will, to the backbone. They don't apply to the companies that are a very important part of our economy, some of which have operations in my district, such as Google and all, that in and of themselves can regulate and do so regularly where you go when you search.
Right.
You know, there have been a number of articles about some of the search engines and how they can change their algorithms and affect where you end up. These net neutrality rules that they're so happy to have in place over the backbone do not apply to them, and the question really should be asked, should they be applied to the search engines of the world and the Netflix of the world?
That's an excellent
and
question.
you know, I'm not saying they should, but clearly it's one thing to drive on the freeway. It's another to get into the neighborhood where you want to go. These net neutrality rules, as promulgated, I think, outside the statute by the FCC, don't even touch the Googles of the world or whoever else that's doing that piece. They get to just keep doing what they're doing and regulate where you get to go.
Ms. Eshoo, that's an interesting question. I learned that during the campaign. That if
they are
folks,
really inherently different.
If folks paid their search company a little extra money, they could get their name at the top of the search screen.
But
Mine's at the
I think
bottom,
it's important for the committee to, maybe this is Internet and High Technology 101 here, but the search engines and the broadband service providers are inherently different. And sure. I don't think we should get them tangled up in this. And Mr. Polis is nodding, and because he understands this very, very well.
And if the gentleman will just yield for a moment on that. So again, with regard to, you know, it's as if the people who produce television shows, totally different than the cable that brings it in or the bandwidth if it's over the airwaves. And I want to make sure that Mr. Walden, I think you were largely being facetious in saying we should be looking at what these large content companies are doing and where they're driving people, right? You weren't actually advocating that, or were you actually advocating that?
Mr. Woodall, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Polis, I'm not saying that we necessarily need to do that. However, the European Union is now investigating one of those companies right now over these very issues. And so all I'm saying is it's interesting those who advocate this kind of regulation on the next place don't necessarily want it on themselves. I'm not saying it needs to be there either. But I can tell you when you modify the algorithm, you can have a dramatic effect on what comes up when you type in furniture. Just go read the Wall Street Journal story.
So you do acknowledge, though, that the two are...
And so I think that's an issue that's out there. And I think it's an issue consumers are rightly concerned about.
And to go to your point, Mr. Polis, not that we ought to be regulating in that field, but I could make a very impassioned speech for why it is that my poor mom and dad, they don't know that they have a choice in search providers. They think Google's the only one they have. They type in their thing. They expect to get a fair response back. Turns out people are paying. They're paying to get their name up there first. So my parents see something different. That, same thing with their satellite provider, their internet provider, their
very different
DSL provider.
They're very different.
In terms of folks having a consumer need that the government should not be involved in. But as we debate that, I'm sure if that needs to be debated in a committee hearing, it'll come to that. We talked a little bit about process. I'm a big believer in an open process.
So am I, sir.
It meant a lot to me that you said you'd only intended to hold one hearing, but your minority colleagues asked you to hold a second one, so you held a second one. That speaks volumes about what goes on over on your committee. But there has been a lot of disinformation at the full House level about what's a closed process because you're unwilling to hear somebody's ideas, and when someone's ideas just aren't appropriate because you're talking about apples and they want to talk about oranges. Was there a single germane amendment in your committee that you refused to hear?
I think you found an area where my ranking member and I will agree on this issue, because she just said to me what I would say to you is no amendment is germane under the Congressional Review Act. And she would know that, having been a co-sponsor of a couple of these. And this is how you go at rules that you disagree with. It is a tool of the Congress. And so, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Woodall, none of the amendments. However, rather than just simply immediately rule them out of order, I allowed the makers of the amendments to offer them, to articulate their case for them, and at least have that opportunity, both in the subcommittee and, if they wanted, in the full committee. And I held a second hearing at their request, postponed the markup for another week and ended up, as you've heard, with more witnesses for the minority than the majority, if you include the 3 Democrat members of the FCC. I think that's pretty unprecedented. I'm not afraid of the open public process. I enshrine it. I believe in it. I have a journalism major. I'm for it. This is one of those rare circumstances I come before you and say, to follow the rules and the statute and the parliamentarians' guidance, amendments are not in order. And that's why this should be a closed rule.
And just as that bit of history, of course, this isn't a Republican process or a Democrat process. This is a congressional process. I think Mr. McGovern expressed some concern about the process. I can't help but think, as I look there at your former boss, Mr. McGovern, that Mr. Moakley was one of the supporters of the Congressional Review Act back in the day and was proud to vote yes.
We heard the reasons. If Joe yield, we heard the reasons why this is probably is not the appropriate process. I raise the issue simply because we had a closed rule on the deem and pass bill last week, and we have another closed rule now, and this is becoming a pattern. I guess you can call it an open process because we're having a hearing in the Rules Committee, but I think people would rather be able to offer their ideas on the floor.
I had constituents in the office today, and the gentleman will appreciate this, who said, Rob, can't you all pass something in the Congress that just says for each bill there's only going to be one idea, and you're just going to vote on that one idea, find out where 51% of the people...
Will gentlemen yield for a second? I have that bill, actually, along with Doug Lamborn and Scott Tipton from Colorado, and we'd be honored to include you as a co-sponsor. It's a single-subject bill.
I'm grateful. And I'm a big believer in single-subject bills, and that's what's been so nice about... We had that in the presidential finance, the public finance presidential campaigns, and we have that in every CRA provision that comes before us. One subject, one bill, one up or down vote. And I appreciate the constraints under which the chairman had to operate.
If the gentleman yield for a moment, I believe the bill's been referred to Rules Committee, so maybe the gentleman can use his influence with our August chair to see if we can hold an original jurisdiction hearing on single subject.
I'm looking forward to being a part of that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I appreciate both of you being here.
Thank you.
It's always interesting to hear the dialogue that goes back and forth from all of our members. But my only concern is this, is in particular if the FCC, and I think our position is that they didn't have the authority to do this. And that's why I like to keep the discussion. There's all kinds of reasons why we don't think they should do it. Ms. Polis mentioned about the Catholics. Well, I think 68 million Catholics, if they were cut out of the process, would be a large force to be reckoned with. So I just think that, for all the arguments in regards to the vitality of the Internet, the innovation of the Internet, for the government to get involved when even though there may have been some missteps, but overall, when it's operating well, anytime the government gets involved in any process, it just mucks it up. I hate to say it. It just seems like when government overreaches, particularly in the rulemaking area, when Congress has not had input into the rule, that I believe that we go way outside of it. Mr. Woodall mentioned the size of his district. My district's even larger than his. And I'll be honest with you that I have not received any complaints specifically reference to the operation of the Internet and their ability to receive what they want. So I worry that when you start taking out of context or taking issues that are not widespread and then trying to regulate them, I believe it's overreach of government. And I truly believe, and I appreciate both of your testimony, both are from the heart, but in my heart, I just think that it's an overreach of the federal government.
Would my colleague yield just for one statement? Very brief.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not as anti-government as you are, because I see the government as being us. And just as a reference point, I understand that you're speaking about regulatory measures, but the Internet came about as a result of the Pentagon, and last time I looked, that was the government.
But they didn't regulate it. I yield back.
Scott. It's already been said twice.
Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster.
Hang on, I might have a question.
Mr. Chairman, while he's
I don't have one.
doing that, can I ask you a question? No? Yeah, I just wanted to, I don't recall if I requested that, that the letters that the subcommittee and the full committee received, that we make that part of your record. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
An hour and a half with us.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
That concludes the hearing, and we will distribute the rule. Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Grandfather Community, North Carolina, for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I move the committee grant a closed rule for consideration of H.J. Res. 37, disapproving the rules submitted by the Federal Communications Commission with respect to regulating the Internet and broadband industry practices. The rule provides for 1 hour debate on the joint resolution equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the joint resolution. The rule provides that the joint resolution shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the joint resolution. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit.
You've heard the motion of the gentlewoman. We've had a thorough 90-minute discussion, near 90-minute discussion on this, and I think we know that the CRA calls for an up or down vote on the resolution. Is there any amendment? Mr. McGovern.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee report an open rule for consideration of H.J. Res. 37. Mr. Chairman, another closed rule, another emergency meeting. This is an emergency meeting. No jobs. That we're talking about something that the White House says that they're going to veto, that the Senate's probably not going to take up yet. It's an emergency meeting. You can't give a simple waiver to two thoughtful amendments by two members of the committee, yet the rule waives all rules for the resolution. So I hope my colleagues would join with me on voting for this amendment.
Any further discussion? If not, the vote occurs on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Those in
Aye.
favor no. The chair of the noes have it.
I ask for a roll
Clerk,
call.
call the roll.
Mr. Sessions. Ms. Fox. No. Mr. Bishop. No. Mr. Woodall. No. Mr. Nugent. No. Mr. Scott. No. Mr. Webster. No. Mrs. Slaughter. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. Hastings. Aye. Mr. Pope.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman.
No, and the clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 7 nays.
And the motion is not agreed to. Are there further amendments? Mr. Hastings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I move that the committee make an order and provide any necessary waivers for amendment number 1 offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Doyle, which would reinstate the ability of the FCC to guard against Internet access providers from blocking a consumer's access to lawful Internet content. And with the chair's permission, I'll go forward with my support of the motion. The no blocking rule simply states that broadband providers cannot block lawful content. This particularly non-controversial principle was even incorporated into a bill introduced in 2006 by then Chairman Barton. Representative Doyle's amendment protecting this rule was blocked in committee by this rare and extreme process. But the Republican majority has the power to grant him a waiver. We have that power here in the Rules Committee today, so that consumers will be guaranteed access to their choice of legal content online. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let me just say this rare and extreme process is one that has been supported by the ranking member of the subcommittee, and the majority leader in the Senate is supported as well. So I'm going to urge a no vote on the Hastings amendment. Mr. Webster.
I'd just like to ask a question, Mr. Chair. If this amendment were adopted, would this cease to be a CRA?
It would. It would. This is clearly a simple procedure that was put into place with the Congressional Review Act that calls for an up or down vote. I work on these. One of the issues that I'm very immersed in is trade agreements. One of the things that happens with international trade agreements is that so-called Trade Promotion Authority grants to the executive branch the ability to negotiate an agreement with another country. The country realizes that once that negotiation is completed, it has to go back to the Congress, but under so-called fast track or trade promotion authority, it means an up or down vote. The Congressional Review Act is very similar to that. It says that this provision is there. Chairman Walden has indicated that these issues that have come forward and they're discussing are things that he believes there needs to be a full airing and a discussion of at the committee level when they come back with legislation. So this is simply to take the step under the provisions of the CRA Act, which have been used by, as I said, Ms. Eshoo and others, and then we will allow the committee process to work its will. Thank you. So I urge a no vote on the Hastings amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Pay the chair. The noes have it. The noes have it. The motion. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions. Ms. Fox. No. Mr. Bishop. No. Mr. Woodall. No. Mr. Nugent. No. Mr. Scott. No. Mr. Webster. No. Ms. Slaughter. Mr. McGovern. Aye. Mr. Hastings.
Aye.
Mr. Polis.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman.
No. On the clerk report total, and the motion is not agreed to. Are there further amendments? Mr. Polis.
Mr. Chair, I move the committee make an order and provide any necessary waivers for Amendment 2 offered by the gentleman from California, Ms. Matsui, which would prefer the transparency rule adopted by the FCC as part of the Open Internet Order requiring broadband providers to make available their network management practices as well as performance and commercial terms so that consumers can make informed choices. When we talk about network management practices, a lot can happen under that, and it could have a ideological tinge to it. It could have a pay-to-play tinge to it. And this is a widely supported rule, bipartisan support. And we hope that the majority will grant Ms. Matsui's amendment that will really help provide consumer confidence and I think also lead to greater investment in broadband infrastructure.
You've heard the motion of the gentleman. Any further discussion? If not, the vote occurs on the Polis amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Pay the chair. The noes have it. The noes have it. The motion is
roll
not
call,
agreed
Mr.
to.
Chair.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions. Ms. Fox. No. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Woodall. No. Mr. Nugent. No. Mr. Scott. No. Mr. Webster. No. Ms. Slaughter. Mr. McGovern. Aye. Mr. Hastings. Aye. Mr. Polis.
Aye.
No. On the clerk report total, and the motion is not agreed to. Are there further amendments? If not, the vote occurs on the motion of the gentlewoman from Grandfather Community. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Pay the chair. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions. Ms. Fox.
No. Aye.
Mr. Bishop. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Nugent. Mr. Scott. Mr. Webster. Ms. Slaughter. Mr. McGovern. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Polis. Mr. Chairman.
Aye. And the clerk report total. And the motion is agreed to. And the gentleman from Lawrenceville, Georgia, Mr. Woodall, will manage for the
Mr. Chairman,
majority.
can you give us?
Is there a manager on this side, or do you want? Yes. Mr. Polis will be manager in the minority.
Thank you.
Mr. Hastings.
Mr. Chairman, can you give us your take on where we are in terms of schedule for the remainder of the week?
Well, we have, I guess, announced meetings for tomorrow. Was that a 3 you put up? My peripheral vision is not all that great. You could have said 3. 3 o'clock tomorrow, we're going to be meeting on is that the greenhouse gas bill at 3 o'clock. And other than that, as you all know, we have a continuing resolution, which is in operation until Friday of this week. And there are discussions underway. And obviously, we will be following closely, and this committee will be very involved once we see a product move forward. Thank you all very much. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.